and I own Loop by Loop Studio, which is a rug hooking studio in Warren, Rhode Island, and I sell original kits and designs and wool and all the things that you could possibly need for rug hooking. I sell them here and I sell them online at loopbyloopstudio.com. So I have been making some videos to get people started in rug hooking because like I always say, I call myself sort of an ambassador to rug hooking. I want people to rug hook. I want people to enjoy this wonderful, beautiful craft. So what I figured I would do today was show you a little bit about wool cutters, how I use them, the different types there are, and how I process my wool for cutting. So I use mostly wool fabric strips when I'm making my rugs, which you can see behind me here. I use wool fabric strips in all the kits I make, so I cut a ton of wool fabric strips almost every single day. So let me show you how I do that. So what I do is I start with wool yardage. So this is a piece that I've been working from. Basically, I'll dye it at home. I don't have a dye studio here at my studio, but I do all my dyeing at home. It's all been washed and dried, so it's fluffier than the wool that you buy off the rack. It's felted, as they say. It's not super thick though. Why don't you get in here and take a look at that thickness. You don't want anything thicker than this, so this is kind of called like skirt weight, medium weight wool. And I get a lot of it from DORR mill. So what I do is I hold my wool up by the selvage, and I'm gonna snip it. I snip it about every 8 inches or so because that's a great size to go through my cutter. So snip it up at the selvage and then rip it down. And the reason why I snip it at the selvage is because wool has a grid type grain to it. When you snip at the selvage and you get a nice clean rip, you know that you're ripping it on the grain. And then when you cut your wool down into wool fabric strips, you'll have less fraying to your wool fabric strip. So that's just a little tip. If you're ripping down a garment or some sort of recycled wool where there's no selvage, just do your best. Don't worry too much about it. So now what I'm doing is I'm taking my yardage here. It's about maybe 54 inches long or so. I buy wool that's, I think, 60 inches long, and then when I wash it, it shrinks down to about 54 inches, I believe. I fold it in half. Fold it in half again, and then I'm going to take my scissors and I'm going to cut this one long piece of wool into 4 smaller pieces of wool. So now I have 4 of these. Now the reason I do this is just because this 8 by roughly 13-inch piece is an appropriate size to go through my cutter. So I keep all different stacks around my studio that are about this size. That way they're ready to go when I need to cut them up. So you can see all these different textures and pieces I have here. This is the way you'll find most of my wool in the studio. This is it in yardage form, and then I don't know if you can get a shot over here. Here's my multiple piles of wool over there that I work from. So I'm just continuously cutting it down all the time. And actually, you should take a look at all these strips here. I keep multiple baskets around of different colors and different sizes. Pretty much everywhere at my disposal. So now that I have my wool fabric cut down to an appropriate size, I'm going to show you my array of cutters and the differences between them. So when you buy a wool cutter, you can get a couple of different kinds. You can get a kind that cuts with a blade, and you can get a kind that cuts with elastic bands against metal, and it uses that kind of pressure to cut your wool fabric strip. There's advantages to the latter kind, the kind that uses the elastic bands, because when you buy a cutter with a blade, that blade needs to be sharpened periodically, and it can just be a pain to send that blade away to a rug cutter maker professional to do that. So I'm going to show you this really old one. I have a variety of cutters, and to be honest, a few of them were donated to me. So that's what I use because I was given them. So this is a very old Fraser cutter. You can tell how old it is. It has a little bit of rust on it. Here's the blade underneath, you can see. And you can just tell by looking at it, it's an older model. Again, I was given this, so I use it. I have what's called a number 4 blade on here. So these are, it's going to cut wool strips, 4 of them, that are 1/8 of an inch wide, okay? I also have a Rigby model here. Again, also used as a blade, just a different maker of cutter. It's another older model, and I have on here a number 6 blade. So it cuts 4 strips that are 6/32 of an inch wide. I also have a Bolivar, and this is the one I use the most by far. Now, this has that elastic band cutting device. So these elastic bands press against the metal, and this cuts me 6 number 8 strips that are 1/4 inch wide with every pass through the cutter. Okay, so I'm going to demonstrate now on this Fraser cutter. I'm going to clamp it on. Normally I work on a sturdier table, but this is just here for these purposes. Now, I told you that I cut my wool about 8 inches wide. When I'm cutting number 4 strips, I'm going to snip this at the top. I'm going to cut my wool down to a thinner piece, because as I move this wool through, you'll see that this kind of moves back and forth. Even though I'm holding it over here with my fingers, this has a tendency to kind of move back and forth. And if it were a lot wider, I wouldn't be able to control sort of the straightness of this cutter. So here we go. Here's my first 4 strips. What I'm doing, I'm taking the wool, and why don't you come over here and look. I'm taking the wool and I'm pressing it against this little metal piece here. I'm sort of pressing it against here, and I'm also pushing it forward as I turn the handle, and it gets caught in there. And then usually when I'm just about to end, I kind of move my hand forward and grab them, just to make sure they don't get tangled or anything like that. So that's basically how these blade cutters work. The Fraser and the Rigby are really similar. They just get clamped on, and they cut the same way. Here's those number 6s. Simple, simple, simple. Okay. So now I'm going to show you the Bolivar cutter and how that works. All these cutters just clamp onto your table. There's other cutters out there. There's lots of other cutters. This certainly isn't, I'm not an authority on this because there's cutters that stick to tabletops. There's lots of different models out there. These are just the few that I use. So the process is the same. You can see how it cuts me 6 strips. So I get a bit more bang for my buck with this Bolivar cutter because it cuts me more wool with each pass. It cuts a larger amount. Sometimes the wool, it cuts, but it kind of scores. So you just pull it apart like that. It cuts fine. You just sometimes have to pull these apart. So let me do that again. Always stabilizing the wool with my hand, and here it is again. So again, just pull them apart. Now the cool thing about this Bolivar is it's really easy to clean the dust out of them. I guess they're all pretty easy to clean the dust out of. So what I've done, since I accumulate a lot of dust, is I have this electric air blower, and once you come back, I tend to move these little elastics to the side, and it's going to be noisy. Usually that doesn't happen. And that's how I clean out the wool cutter. The other thing is when I'm cutting a ton of wool at a time, I also use a dust mask. So for anybody that's an experienced in using a lot of wool strips, you probably know that it can become very dusty. So with the amount of wool strips that I cut, I use a mask pretty much every time I'm cutting wool, just to help keep that dust at bay. So I'm going to show you another wool cutter. It's not mine. It's actually my mother. She recently upgraded to the Mac Daddy of wool cutters, called the Townsend or the Beeline, okay? And she upgraded to this system, the Beeline system. She bought 3 different blades, and she actually got an extended blade. So every time that she cuts this number 8, it also cuts 6, but it also cuts, I think, 6 of the number 6 wool and the number 4 wool. So it was an investment, but it cuts her a lot. So this gets clamped on as well. And it cuts so smooth. You can tell I'm very jealous. So here's my wool. Look at how nice and long this handle is. It's very comfortable to use. And my gosh, that cuts so nice. And here they are, not scored at all. They come out just like linguine. Okay, I'm gonna push this little piece through. So nice. So this is nice, but this cutter is very expensive. I think the cutter itself plus a blade will run you maybe between $500 and $600, and then the additional blades cost more money. The other really nice thing about this cutter, though, is, you know how I told you how I use 3 cutters for 3 different sizes, mostly because I don't want to change my blades out very often. This is a lot easier to do that. Let me see if I can do this. Okay, so I push it that way. Look at it, opens up. Pull a blade out. Excuse my reach. Grab another one. This is a 4 I just put on there, so that thinner piece. Do that, and I think I move that. Look at that, that's so easy. My gosh. Perfect. Now let's see, I'm gonna get my little piece of wool here. Changed colors, I'm all done with my blue. Whoops. Wow, oh, it cuts 8. It cuts 8 number 4. Look at that. It's amazing. So that's really cool, and I'm jealous, and I think I want to upgrade too and get one of these because, you know, like I said, I cut a lot of wool, and it would just be really, really good. A couple more things I want to mention, okay, is that one thing I forgot to tell you about your wool when it's cut down to this size. If you have a piece of selvage on the top, which you're bound to do, or to have, you want to snip that selvage off of your wool before you send it through the cutter. You shouldn't be sending any selvage through your wool cutter because it'll dull your blades and just put more wear on your cutter than you need. You also shouldn't cut anything else with your wool cutter. So no velvet, no cotton, nothing else, because it's just not going to be good for these really expensive machines that you just paid a lot of money for. So don't like try anything, send anything through. I think other people have tried it and it just doesn't work. It's not going to work out for you. Yep. So my lovely assistant Adam just asked me to say, how much do these cutters run? Now, I think I mentioned the Fraser and the Rigby. Those have been donated to me, so I did not purchase these, but I think they run somewhere within the maybe $250, $300 range. These are cutters that you can find used often, though. Because they're older cutters, older models, a lot of times you can find them for a good price used. And these are, I think I mentioned that you have to send the blades away to be sharpened here and there. I believe both of these companies, there are companies out there that you can find that will sharpen these blades. You just have to do some Google searching. I can't exactly remember who's sharpening the blades at this point. What happens with a lot of these metalsmiths and machine makers, they make their cutters for their lifetime, and then they pass on, or they retire, and then somebody else has to kind of inherit the company to keep up with these cutters. The Bolivar and the Beelines, they're a lot newer, so they're probably not gonna like go out of business anytime soon. So maybe around $300. The Bolivar is gonna run you maybe $6 for the cutter and a blade, and then additional blades are more than that. Same then that I told you about this one. So the other thing I want to show you just before we go is, what do you do if you can't invest in a cutter like this now? You don't need a cutter to do primitive rug hooking. It's harder to make noodles with anything but a cutter if you're working really small, like this number 4, I mean, look at how tiny they are. It's really hard to get a consistent cut unless you're using a cutter. But what if you want to do like something with like a number 8 or maybe something bigger? Well, you can take your wool fabric and you can fold it up. This is the best way I know how. So people have also suggested using a rotary cutter and a ruler. I just think this is easier. Fold it so it's quadrupled, and then cut your own noodles. Now, I haven't done this in a long time, but when I'm doing things like proddy pins, like I have here on my apron, I cut all my own petals like this. I park myself in front of the TV, and this is what I do. Oh, there, that one's a little thinner, I guess. And this is really, really great if you're looking for a 1/4 inch wide. Again, you can use a ruler. I'm just guesstimating. It also gives it that shabby chic look too, you know, everything's handmade, doesn't have to look like perfectly straight wool, adds a lot more texture to it. So, let's see, did I miss anything, Adam? We're good? All right, well, anyway, like I said, I'm Haley Perry and I own Loop by Loop Studio. You can go to loopbyloopstudio.com to see all my kits and supplies, or to contact me if you have any questions about this. I love helping people get started with rug hooking, so don't be a stranger. Thanks so much.